is Courtney and I am back with another video for Scrapping for Less. Today I'm going to be using a Merry Little Christmas stamp set by Avery, Elle, and we're going to be creating 4 tags today. So I have my tags all die cut and ready to go, and we're going to be starting with a little bit of ink blending. So I'm going to do these tags pretty much all the same way, so I'm just going to show you one here. I'm taking a piece of Eclipse masking paper and I'm just going to be cutting a curve for where my snow is going to be, and I'll place that down on the bottom part of my little tag there, and we'll move on to the ink blending. I'm using regular distress inks, and I'm starting off with Salty Ocean, starting my way from the top, working my way down to the bottom. And then I'll move on to my blueprint sketch, start from the top and work my way down to maybe about halfway down to that mask. Then I will move on to chipped sapphire, and I'll just be adding that just pretty much to the top of my tag there. Then I'll go back to my blueprint sketch, blend that chipped sapphire out, and then end up with my Salty Ocean again, just for the bottom where my mask is. Once the ink blending was done, I took a paintbrush and some clean water and just splattered that a little bit around, dabbed that up with a paper towel, and I did set these aside to dry while I do my coloring. I'm going to be heat embossing over them, so I do want to make sure that the ink is completely dry before I do that. I did have to change over my masks just because it got a little bit wet because of the ink and the water. So I did 2 with one mask, and I ended up cutting another for the other ones just because I didn't want to take any chances of it bleeding. So like I said, once that was done, I went ahead and put all of those aside, and we'll move on to the stamping. And there's a ton of cute little images in the stamp set. So I have a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock here, and I'm just going to be stamping out almost all of the images within the stamp set. These are going to be 4 separate tags, and they're all going to have a different little character on them. These little mice will both go on the same tag. Then you have the little penguin there, the bear, and the reindeer. Once they were stamped out, we'll move on to the Copic Coloring, and I'm going to not show you all of the coloring, and I'm going to speed it up quite a bit, just mainly so that you can see the color combinations that I've used. And we'll start with the little critters themselves, starting off with this little penguin here. I'm going to mainly use a 3-color blend for the little critters. Going right in with my darkest color for this, which is the W7, blending that out with the W5 and then the W1. Usually with the grays, whether it be the warm grays, the cool grays, the toner grays, you can usually start with your darkest color and still be able to get a good blend. You'll see me kind of bounce around a little bit here, so I apologize up front, but while I had my warm gray markers out, I colored my little mice here, and they're kind of facing each other, so I'm putting my shading on the left-hand side for the little mouse on the left and the right-hand side for the little mouse on the right. And I'm just basically using the same color combination and doing my shading the same way, starting off with that W7. I'm sorry, I started with the W5 here, went to my W3, and then to my W1. For the little white area on this little penguin's face, I did add a little bit of shading with my C3 and my C1. Even white images do have shadows. I took my R20 just to add a little bit of color to the cheeks of the little mice as well as the little penguin. And for his little beak, I didn't do any shading here. I just went in there with an orange or a YR marker. For my bear, I'm starting off with my lightest color, mapping out my darkest areas. My shadows for him will be underneath his little hat, where the Christmas tree is kind of laying over him, and underneath his little shirt and on the inside of his little legs. Then we'll go in with the darkest color and basically just go over those areas that we had mapped out. Moving on to the E15, and this is where I'll start my flicking. Typically with my darkest color, I don't really do all that much flicking, if at all. I usually just put a line down because these are the super dark areas, so you don't want to overwhelm your image with the dark, or else it's going to end up being a lot darker than you intended maybe. So I'll move on to the E13 here, and I'm going to extend that E15 out even further, and then finally going in with my E11 and blending the rest of that out. For his little nose or snout or whatever this is, I'm going to go in with some E30 markers just to make this a little bit different of a brown than the rest of his body. And these are also going to be the colors that I use for this little reindeer as well. So for the reindeer, I'm doing the same thing as I always do, starting off with my lightest color and mapping out my darkest areas. For this little guy, there will be shading on his legs that are kind of behind the other legs, underneath where his little scarf is hanging over him, and to the right side of his face, being he has his little head tilted that way, so that would naturally be darker. I'll go in with my darkest color. This is the E37, and pretty much go over those same areas that we had mapped out to begin with. Then moving on to an E33, and I'm extending those areas out a little bit further. Now for his legs, these are such a tiny area that you're really not going to have room for all 4 colors. So don't stress that. You don't have to put a highlight or even a shadow in every area within an image. My highlight here is just pretty much going to be on the left side of his face and where his little tail is. And my highlight color is an E30. Before that was an E31. I know my caps are a little bit off screen there. I did have quite a bit of bleeding on this particular image. I'm not sure why. Part of it was me being messy, but I just had a lot of bleeding. So I'm taking my colorless blender here and just touching up some of those areas. I don't necessarily have to get off all of the color, being I'm going to be coloring over it with some reds and greens. I'm not too worried about getting everything off. I just wanted to kind of lighten that at least a little bit. So once I had all of my little characters colored, we'll move on to the reds and the greens. And like I said, this is pretty much just to show you the color combinations that I used. We're going to start with the greens. Whenever I color or use reds in any image or any card, I save the reds for last, because if you even touch a red area with any other marker, you're going to spread it. So I'm going to start with my greens here. And I'm just laying out my darkest areas with my G21. Then I'll go in with a G28, blend that out with a G46, and blend that out a little bit further with a G24, and then finally back to that G21. The shading for his little sweater is going to be underneath his turtleneck and on either side of him, being this is going to be a center light source for this little guy. And for his hat, it's going to be where it's kind of folded over. For the reds, I'm doing the same thing. For his little shoes, the shadow will be on the inside of his shoes. My darkest color here is an R89, blending that out with an R46, then an R35, and then an R22. And I just mixed and matched what I colored here. Some things were red, some things were green, but I'm going to show you the Christmas tree because I colored this a little bit different. But like always, I'm starting with my G21, which is my lightest color, and I'm putting my shading to the left because it's kind of tilted down, but I'm also putting my shading underneath the garland, I think you call it, because that would cast a shadow on the tree. Then I'm going in with my G28 and going over those same areas again with just a line, then blending that out with the G46, then the G24, and then back to the G21. I tried my best to go around the ornaments the best I could, but I knew I was going to color these in anyway, so I wasn't too worried about it. I colored these in solid with the R46 marker because I planned on putting a highlight with the gel pen later anyway. And for the little garland there, I'm just going in with my YR24 and coloring that in solid as well as the little star. Once all of my coloring was done, I did go back in and add some shading to the white areas, mainly on the bases of their little hats and little balls on the ends of their hats. I don't know what you call those either, but I'm just using that C3 and the C1. Next, I'll go in with my gel pen, and I'm going to fix up some of these areas where I had all of this bleeding. Being I have a white background in this case, this will pretty much cover it up. I plan on fussy cutting these out anyway. And I did add a few little details and some highlights. I added some polka dots and stripes to the presents and just some highlights in random areas. Once that was done, I went ahead and fussy cut these, and I did leave a white edge around them as much as I could. And then we're going to take our little tags here, and we're going to use our anti-static tool because I wanted to heat emboss my sentiments. I laid out all my little characters to see where I wanted my sentiment, and the sentiment fits on 3 of them. The one with the bear, he's such a large image that it wasn't going to fit on top of him, and I didn't want to cut my stamp. You can, it doesn't hurt your stamp, it doesn't hurt the quality of it. I just don't do it. So I use my anti-static tool on the 3 that I'm going to white heat emboss. Stamped this out with my Versamark ink on all 3 in the same area. I'll sprinkle on some white embossing powder and go ahead and heat set those. For this other one where I couldn't necessarily fit my sentiment, I figured we're going to probably write on the back of any tags anyway. So I took my Versa Fine Onyx Black ink and just stamped my sentiment on the back of that particular tag. Next, I took some Scotch foam tape and popped up all of my little characters on their individual tags. I did have to cut these in pretty teeny tiny pieces for some of the areas on these characters. So if you are more comfortable, you can certainly use the foam dots. I know that sometimes they're easier to cut down and some of them come pretty teeny tiny to begin with, but I just prefer to use the Scotch foam tape. So I popped up the penguin by itself, the reindeer by itself, the 2 little mice together, and then finally my little bear there. I did end up adding a shadow underneath them, being I left my snow stark white. I wanted to add a little bit of something. So I took my C3 marker and just basically put a couple little scribbles underneath each one of the characters. And then I'll go in with my C1 and just blend that out a little bit further and kind of fading that off to the white in the snow. Finally, I took a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen and just added shimmer to kind of some random areas, the presents and pieces of their hats. And I did string some twine on each one of these tags as well. And that is the cards, or not cards, but that's the project for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.